morning to each and every one of you on this Labor Day weekend. Good morning. I think this year in particular, Labor Day weekend takes on a special significance when we think about those of us in our community as well as in our extended families, perhaps, who are seeking employment. And we need to keep all of those people in our thoughts and prayers. All, not only in the United States, but all over the world as well. I want to talk to you a little bit about the gospel passage, which is from Mark's gospel. Remember, the last several weeks we've been discussing passages from John's gospel. And John's gospel has a lot in it that the other synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't have within it. And now we're switching to Mark's gospel, so that what we find is something slightly different in the tone of it all. Mark's gospel focuses more upon what Jesus did and did not do, perhaps, while he was on the face of the earth in the course of his mere 3 years of public ministry. And so in today's gospel passage from Mark, what we find is an interaction, first of all, between Jesus and the Pharisees and the scribes, who came from Jerusalem while Jesus and his disciples were outside of Jerusalem. And they noticed that his disciples did not observe the tradition of the elders, the tradition of the forefathers, who had strict prohibitions against eating anything without first cleaning your hands. And therein lies the kind of half-truth and fuller truth of today's gospel passage. Now, I want to say a word or two to you about this group called the Pharisees, because it came to my attention in preparing this sermon that in the past I had thought the Pharisees were made up of the rabbis, of the learned people, and they were people who studied an awful lot, but they weren't necessarily from the ordained portion of the Jewish religion. The Pharisaical movement, as I understand it now, was largely a movement of very fervent and even zealous lay people who took it upon themselves to kind of not only find out what was in the Jewish scriptures, but also incorporated as part of interpreting what made for a good Jew. They made a kind of quantum leap into discerning what the elders, the people who were not necessarily involved in the Jewish law, had told them about how to be a healthy people. And one of those things that the forefathers had said was that what's going to differentiate us as Jews from the rest of the people is our knowledge that it's better to eat with clean hands than it is to eat with hands that may have been soiled by working in the fields, with all of that dust and that dirt and everything else that you get when you're working outside in the fields. And so what the elders came up with were sanitary functions for the Jewish people. Now, that didn't have anything at all to do with the scriptures per se, but it was a good thing nonetheless. Just as it is today, any mother or father worth his or her salt is going to tell the young children and train children from a young age to wash their hands before supper. How many of you have been taught that? Everybody. It's a good thing, okay? It's not like it's a bad thing. It's just that it's not part of what I think Jesus was very concerned and focused about, which was spiritual development. What Jesus, I think, gets frustrated about with the Pharisees is not so much that they taught the wrong things. Certainly washing your hands is the right thing to do. but it became the focus of religion for them. All of that pomp and circumstance, all of that ceremony, all of the things that are external to a living, vibrant faith in communion in Yahweh for the Jews, or a living, vibrant faith in Jesus, in God, for us Christians, or for that matter, peoples of other world religions who have a living, vibrant faith with God. All of that stuff that the Pharisees talked about in terms of ritual cleansing, in terms of being holy, in terms of all of that, got in the way of the way that Jesus saw as what was of primary importance, which was to have a relationship with God. Do you follow me? If not, I can give you an example. The story goes that in one Episcopal church, probably several decades ago, there was a woman who was serving on the altar guild for that upcoming Sunday, and she came on Saturday to set up the altar for the Episcopal Holy Eucharistic service, and while she was doing that, one of her co-workers came in with a pineapple. Now, the pineapple the co-worker had gotten from Hawaii, and she brought it back on the airplane with her from Hawaii and gave it to her co-worker as part of a gift. Well, the woman working altar guild forgot that when she got the pineapple, she put it on the altar and left it there. And it stayed there for the Sunday service. Now, for that particular Sunday service, nobody was thinking about the significance of the Eucharist, but everybody present there was saying, "What is that pineapple doing there?" And there was a new clergy person celebrating the Holy Eucharist who didn't know any better and just simply left the pineapple on the altar, thinking that was some kind of a tradition or custom that this local congregation had. And it stayed on the altar for the next month until another clergy person came and looked at that pineapple and said, "What in the world is that pineapple doing here?" Took it off the altar and was prohibited from coming back to that church after that. Because everybody said, "This is the way it's supposed to be." Now you see how ridiculous it can get when you focus upon the incidentals of what's really important in spirituality. There is a big movement right now, a hugely important movement taking place among many people, we're told, in America, probably in the world as well, away from all of those incidentals that our grandparents and even we focused so much upon, and in the best sense of the word, a desire to focus rather upon that relationship with God. Okay? So that we don't have to worry whether we sit or stand as much anymore. But rather, let's get down to what's really important, which is where God resides within us. You agree with that? That's why we're here, see. We're not here whether to find out if there's a pineapple on the altar or not. It's much more important than that. And that's what Jesus is talking about when he gets so down on those Pharisees. I actually believe that Jesus was a little bit impatient because Jesus saw his mission as limited in terms of time duration. He only had 3 years to be with people. And so he couldn't be patient. He had to tell people what was important. And the important thing is not the incidentals of religion. How often you wash your hands, for example, which is important. There's no question about that from a hygienic standpoint. It's very important to wash your hands before meals. But what Jesus was focused upon was far more important than whether or not you get germs. What Jesus was talking about was the higher levels of the hierarchy of human needs. Remember a couple of Sundays ago, we talked about Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of human needs. Jesus is not as concerned, at least in today's gospel passage, about the lower order of things, whether or not you've got food and shelter. What Jesus is concerned about is that level of transcendence. That level of getting into what Jesus saw as the most important thing in life, which is our spirits and our spirituality and our spiritual development. Jesus clearly saw that as more important than the material. Not that the material doesn't follow, but the spirituality is what too often gets neglected. Too often gets even never got to, because we're so obsessed with all other kinds of wants and needs at the material level. And what Jesus is saying is, look folks, I've only got 3 years with you. Some scholars would even say 18 months was all Jesus' public ministry was about. But listen to what I'm about to tell you. What badness comes is not from outside as much as it is from your spirit. And so that's where the focus is. That's where the energy needs to be focused on. All of those things that Jesus lists, I think there's 7 or 8 of them, one of which I don't even know what it is. Licentiousness. If you know what licentiousness is, let me know after the service, okay? I have no idea what licentiousness is. But on the other things, what he's saying is that it comes from within your spirit. And so work on that. Not that we're going to be able to completely eradicate those things. We, after all, are human beings and not divine. But if you don't focus upon that, if all you focus upon is washing your hands, you've lost the point of what it means to be involved in a community of faith, whether it be Judaism at the time of Jesus, Christianity today, or any other kind of community of faith for that matter. If all the action occurs at just the external level and it's not from within, then think again about why you're here. We're here for transformation. We're here for becoming newly made in the image and likeness of God. And that's so important. It's a vital consequence. And Jesus himself, the Son of God, tells us that. So the most important thing that you do is to work from within in your relationship to God. That's why daily prayer is so important. That's why keeping the spirit of the law is so important, and not just the letter of the law. People rightly criticize those who keep the letter of the law and don't live according to the spirit. They rightly criticize those people today as hypocrites, just as Jesus rightly criticized the Pharisees of his day as hypocrites. It's the same thing. We have to get beyond the law. Not that the law is bad, not that washing your hands is a bad thing at all. But you have to get beyond that to see what's really important, to get into the spirit of why the law existed in the first place. Otherwise, we'll be running around worrying about why pineapples are on our altars. See how crazy that is, how shallow a life that is? What Jesus does is he invites us to a deeper level. Now, if you don't want to live at that deeper level, you don't have to, and that's why some people choose to turn their backs on Christ. But if you want to be fulfilled, and I believe there's a strong drive within people of authenticity and integrity to want to live a fuller and deeper life, then pay attention to what God is telling us in today's scripture passage. Say your prayers. Get into a right relationship with God. Allow yourself to be even convicted of one of those 7 things, including licentiousness, whatever that may be. Allow yourself to be transformed and remade. It's an exciting way to live. It's the kingdom way of living. And I'll guarantee you, when all is said and done, it is far better to strive to live into the kingdom of God than to try to continue to live by the standards of the kingdom of this world.